She heard them laughing before she even reached the square. A blind man stood alone at the edge of the dance floor, hat in his hand's head, slightly bowed, and the crowd let him stand there like he was already gone from this world. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke to him. They just watched. So she walked forward, and everything changed. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1884 arrived in Caldwell Creek, Wyoming, like it always did, loud, bright, and full of itself. The town square had been strung with lanterns for the annual harvest dance. Fiddles tuned up. Children ran between the legs of adults who smelled like pine soap and good whiskey. Women in their Sunday best fanned themselves against the last heat of the day, and the men stood in clusters, boots polished, voices carrying. It was the kind of evening that made a person feel like the world was generous. Unless, of course, the world had never been particularly generous to you. Evelyn Calloway stood at the far edge of the wooden walkway outside Miller's General Store, smoothing the front of her pale yellow dress with both hands. The fabric was clean. She'd pressed it herself that morning twice because the iron kept catching. The dress fit her the way dresses never quite fit her, pulling across the shoulders, stretching at the seams, doing its honest best against a body that the dressmaker in town had once described loud enough for 3 other women to hear as a real challenge to work with. Evelyn had smiled at that. She'd gotten good at smiling at things that weren't funny. She was 24 years old, round-faced, brown-haired, blue-eyed, and built in a way that made strangers feel entitled to opinions. She had come to Caldwell Creek 8 months ago from eastern Kansas after her father passed, and her 2 older brothers made it quietly, firmly clear that the family farm was not going to support a woman who, in their words, hadn't managed to secure herself a future. They hadn't been cruel about it. That was almost the worst part. They'd been practical. The way people are practical when they've already decided the outcome and just need to deliver the news. She'd packed what she could carry and taken the stage west. She wasn't looking for a husband. She wasn't looking for rescue. She was looking for a place that didn't already have a verdict on her before she opened her mouth. Caldwell Creek had not entirely delivered on that hope, but it had given her work, a position cooking and keeping house for the Whitmore family on the north end of town, and work was enough. Work was something she was genuinely good at. Work didn't look at her the way people looked at her. She stood there now, at the edge of the festivities, watching the lanterns sway, telling herself she was only here because Mrs. Whitmore had insisted she come and enjoy herself for one evening. She was not here hoping to dance. She was not here hoping for anything in particular. Then she saw him. He was standing near the center of the square, just off the edge of the dance floor. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired under a battered tan cowboy hat. He wore a plain white shirt, with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark trousers, worn boots. He held his hat in both hands in front of him, turning it slowly by the brim, the kind of motion a man makes when he's trying to look like he isn't nervous. His eyes were open, but they weren't moving the way eyes move when they're taking in a room. She understood immediately. He was blind, and he was alone in the middle of the most crowded night Caldwell Creek had seen all summer. She didn't know who he was. She'd heard talk of a rancher north of town, a man named Walker, who'd built his operation from near nothing, who'd lost his sight in some kind of accident 2 years back, and had refused stubbornly, and according to everyone who mentioned it, to sell his land, or accept help, or do any of the sensible things a blind man was supposed to do. People talked about him the way they talked about a mule that wouldn't move, with a mixture of grudging respect and active irritation. She hadn't expected him to be at the dance. She hadn't expected him to be so clearly, quietly, heartbreakingly alone. The fiddles struck up a new reel. Couples moved onto the floor. Laughter rose. Somewhere nearby, a woman said something behind her fan, and 2 other women laughed in that specific way. Women laugh when they want you to know you weren't meant to hear, but they don't actually mind if you did. Evelyn looked at the man with the hat. Nobody was going near him. Not in cruelty exactly. More in the way people avoid an uncomfortable truth, they simply arranged themselves around him, leaving him an invisible radius of empty space, because engaging with him would require acknowledging something they'd rather not think about on a festive evening. She watched a young woman approach him from the left, seemingly by accident, then veer away at the last moment when she realized who he was. She watched two men greet each other heartily, 3 feet to his right, without so much as a glance in his direction. She watched a child run directly toward him, get scooped up by its mother before it made contact and carried away like he was something to be protected from. He just stood there, turning his hat. His jaw was set. He wasn't going to show anything. She could see that from where she stood the deliberate stillness of a man who had learned exactly how much of himself to give away in public. Evelyn's feet moved before her head gave them permission. She crossed the square. She was aware of the ground under her boots, the weight of her own steps, the way her dress moved. She was aware of passing through the edge of a group of women who went quiet as she walked by, and then resumed their conversation in lower tones. She was aware of all of it, and she kept walking anyway, because there are moments in a person's life when the only thing worse than doing the uncomfortable thing is standing still and watching someone suffer alone. She stopped in front of him. "Excuse me," she said. He went very still. The hat stopped turning. "I don't believe we've met," she said. "I'm Evelyn Calloway. I work for the Whitmore family." A beat of silence. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a loosening of the jaw, a fraction of warmth in a face that had been locked down tight. "Nathan Walker," he said. His voice was low, careful. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Calloway." "Are you here with anyone, Mr. Walker?" "No." "Are you enjoying the evening?" A pause. "I'm managing." Evelyn looked at the dance floor. The reel was in full swing. Around them the square hummed with noise and movement, and the particular bright energy of people who were having a good time and were aware of it. "I'm not much of a dancer," she said. "I never quite got the steps, but I've always liked the music." He turned his face slightly toward her. "That's so. My mother used to say that music was the only honest thing, because you can't lie to a song. It either moves you or it doesn't." Something crossed his face. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Evelyn paused. "She passed when I was 12, but I still hear things the way she taught me to." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I haven't been to one of these since—" He stopped, started again. "In some time." "Since you lost your sight?" she asked. It wasn't cruel. She said it the way you'd say anything that was simply true. She'd found that pretending around a thing made it larger. Better to name it and let it be a fact rather than a shadow. He turned toward her more fully now. "Most people don't say it straight out." "Does it bother you when they do?" "No," he said. "It bothers me when they don't." She almost smiled. "Then we're agreed." The fiddle shifted to something slower. A couple near them began to sway. "Mr. Walker," Evelyn said, "would you like to stand somewhere less?" She glanced around at the press of bodies, the noise, the way the crowd kept almost touching him and then pulling back. "Less crowded." "I'd like that very much," he said quietly. She didn't take his arm. Not yet. She said, "I'm going to walk to the left of you toward the edge of the square near the oak tree. Tell me if I'm going too fast." "I won't," he said. But she heard something in it, not pride. Gratitude held carefully inside the two small words. They moved through the crowd together. People noticed. She felt it before she saw it. The shift in the quality of the noise around them. The way conversations stuttered and restarted the eyes that followed them to the edge of the square. She kept her eyes forward and her pace steady, and said nothing, because the only thing that mattered right now was getting this man to a place where he could breathe without a crowd arranged around him like a problem to be solved. They reached the oak tree. The music was still audible but softer here, and the voices of the crowd had become a general hum rather than individual words pressing in. "Better?" she asked. "Much," he said. He settled his hat back on his head. Without the motion of his hands to occupy them, he tucked both thumbs in his belt. Another man's habit, the idle gesture of someone who'd spent years with working hands and wasn't sure what to do with them when there was nothing to work. "You don't live in town," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "No, the Whitmore house is at the north edge near the creek road. I've been here 8 months." "Where from before?" "Kansas." And before that, wherever my father's farming took us." She paused. "And you've been in Caldwell Creek longer." 12 years, he said. "I built the Walker Ranch when there was nothing here but sagebrush and ambition. Sagebrush mostly won." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Ranch is still standing, though." "I've heard it mentioned." "Good things or bad things?" "Honest things," she said. "People say you're stubborn." "People are right. They say you won't sell even though—" She stopped herself. "Even though I'm blind and can't run it properly." His tone didn't change. He was filling in the blank she'd left matter-of-fact, like a man who'd heard the argument so many times it no longer had teeth. "That's the kinder version of what they say. The other version has more colorful language." "I imagine it does." "What do you think?" he asked. "Honest. You seem like a woman who says honest things." She considered it. "I think a man who built something from nothing and refuses to let it go deserves more respect than most people around here seem to be giving him." He was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Calloway," he said finally, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Why did you come over tonight, to where I was standing?" She thought about giving him a comfortable answer, something modest and deflecting. Instead, she said, "Because you were alone in the middle of a crowd, and nobody was doing anything about it, and that seemed wrong to me." He absorbed that. Most people would say it wasn't their concern. "Most people," she said, "would be right technically. But I've spent enough time being the person nobody comes over to that I can't quite manage to walk past when I see it happening to someone else." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It had weight in it. The particular weight of two people recognizing something in each other without having the words to name it precisely. From across the square came a burst of laughter. Then a voicemail carrying the voice of a man who wanted to be heard said, "Well, would you look at that?" Old blind Walker finally found himself a companion. Suppose he couldn't see who he was getting. More laughter. The bright, careless laughter of people who've had a few drinks and have decided cruelty is wit. Another voice, female this time. "She's a brave soul, I'll give her that." Evelyn felt the words land the way she always felt them in the chest below the sternum, where she'd built up calluses over years of exactly this. She breathed. She did not look across the square. Nathan had gone very still. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice had gone quiet and careful again. "You shouldn't have to—" "Don't," she said. "Miss Calloway." "Don't apologize for them," she said. "They made their own choices. You didn't make them." He turned his face toward her. In the half-light from the distant lanterns, she could see the muscle working in his jaw. "Does it not bother you?" he asked. "It bothers me," she said. "I just don't give it more than it deserves." He was quiet. Then, "How do you do that?" "Years of practice," she said honestly, "and a fair amount of deciding that the opinions of people who don't actually know me are worth considerably less than they think they are." Another laugh drifted over from the crowd, louder this time, directed. Nathan took one step forward. One deliberate step toward the crowd, his jaw set, his shoulders straight. "Mr. Walker," Evelyn said. He stopped. "They want a reaction," she said. "That's what that laughter is for. It's a hook. They want to see if they can make you do something that'll give them more to talk about." He stood there. She could see him fighting at the fury of a proud man being mocked in public, the specific helplessness of wanting to respond to cruelty and knowing that responding is exactly what the cruelty was designed to provoke. "I know," he said, through his teeth. "Then don't give it to them." He stood there another moment. Then he stepped back. He did not look like a man who'd been talked down. He looked like a man who'd made a choice. There was a difference, and she respected it. "You're very calm," he said. "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm practiced." The music changed again. Something slower and sadder, the kind of tune that could be a waltz if you let it. "Miss Calloway," Nathan said, and his voice had changed to quieter, stripped of its careful armor. "Can I ask you something else?" "You can ask." "Do you—" He stopped, started again. "Do you have work? Steady work? Are the Whitmores treating you well?" It was an odd question. She answered it honestly. "The work is steady. Mrs. Whitmore is fair. Mr. Whitmore is less fair, but he's usually not home enough to cause serious trouble. He nodded slowly. I have a situation at my ranch, he said. I run it with 2 hands good men, but one of them is leaving at the end of the month. His wife's family needs him in Colorado. I need someone who can manage the house, help keep the books, and handle what needs handling when I can't. He paused. When certain things require someone with sight, I pay fair wages, better than fair. Evelyn studied him. You're offering me a job. I'm asking if you'd consider it. We met 20 minutes ago. I know. He turned his hat brim again, that nervous reflex. And I know how it sounds. But you said honest things, and you didn't look away, and you came over when nobody else would. That tells me more about a person than a month of conversation usually does. She looked out toward the square. The crowd was bright and noisy, and absolutely certain, every one of them, that they knew exactly how things should be arranged in the world. She looked back at Nathan Walker. Tell me about the ranch, she said. And he did. He talked for nearly an hour, standing under that oak tree, while the harvest dance carried on without them. He talked about the land, 400 acres of good grass and difficult weather, a creek that was reliable in wet years and worrying in dry ones, a herd that he'd built from 20 head to nearly 90. Before the drought last summer, cut it back to 60. He talked about the house, the outbuildings, the horses he knew by sound and smell, and the particular weight of their footfall. He talked about the 2 hands, Marcus and Pete, what they did well and where they struggled, what the ranch needed that it wasn't getting. He talked like a man who hadn't had a real conversation in a long time. Evelyn listened. She asked questions, real ones, about the accounting system he used, about what the ranch owed, and what it was bringing in, about the barn roof Marcus had mentioned was giving trouble. He answered everything directly without softening the hard parts. The ranch was not failing, but it was not flourishing either. It was doing that difficult thing that a lot of things in life do, surviving in spite of circumstances that should have finished it. Why are you still there? She asked. The ranch. People tell you to sell. Life would be easier. My father broke that ground, he said. He didn't live to see it become what it is. I'll be the one to decide when it's done, not anybody else. She nodded. He couldn't see her nod. She said, I understand that. Do you? My family's farm in Kansas, she said. When my father passed, my brothers sold it inside a year. I understood why. It still felt like losing the last solid thing in the world. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what it feels like. The lanterns across the square were beginning to dim. The fiddles had slowed. The crowd was starting to thin as families gathered, children and couples drifted toward home. I'll think about your offer, Mr. Walker, Evelyn said. Fair enough. He extended a hand, and she took it, a firm, brief handshake, the kind that meant something. I should go, she said. Mrs. Whitmore will expect me home before the last of the lights go out. Miss Calloway. His voice stopped her. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the honesty, she said. She walked back through the thinning square. Some people glanced at her. A woman she barely knew. Margaret Hale from the dry goods, raised her eyebrows in that expressive way that communicated an entire opinion without requiring a single word. Evelyn looked back at her with a pleasant expression and kept walking. She told herself she was going to think carefully about the offer. Weigh it. Sleep on it. Consider whether a woman alone should take a position at a ranch outside of town with a man she'd just met, regardless of how straightforwardly honest he'd seemed. Regardless of the fact that he'd stepped forward when the crowd laughed and then stepped back when she told him it wasn't worth it. She told herself she would think about it. She went home. She lay in the narrow bed in the narrow room off the Whitmore kitchen. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about a man standing alone in the middle of a crowd with his hat in his hands. She thought about the way he'd spoken about his father's land. She thought about what it meant to refuse to let a thing go, even when everyone around you had decided it was already finished. In the morning before Mrs. Whitmore was up, Evelyn wrote a short note. Mr. Walker. I'll take the position. I can start Thursday. E. Calloway. She gave it to the Whitmore boy to carry to the ranch. Then she went and started breakfast because the biscuits needed making, and the world didn't wait on a person's decisions. whether those decisions were large or small, or somewhere in between. Across town at a table in the back of the Gold Dust Saloon, Harlan Beck, the man who'd spoken loudest across the square the night before, sat with two other men and his morning coffee. "Walker showed up to the dance," one of the men said. "With that big Calloway woman of all things." "Not with her," Beck said. "She went to him. There's a difference." "Still looks odd. It looks like an opportunity." Beck wrapped both hands around his mug. "Man's blind his herds down, and now he's got a woman cooking his meals and keeping his books. Add another bad summer and he'll have to sell. He won't have a choice." "You've been saying that for 2 years." "And every year he gets a little closer to the edge," Beck said. "I'm a patient man." He drank his coffee. Outside, the town of Caldwell Creek moved through its morning business wagons, rolling storekeepers, opening their doors. The general machinery of a small western town, turning over and grinding forward. And on the North Road, Evelyn Calloway's note made its way toward a ranch where a man was already up before dawn, moving through his own land by memory and touch, and the sound of his cattle breathing, refusing as he had refused every morning for 2 years to let the world tell him what he was worth. She arrived Thursday. Marcus, the remaining ranch hand, met her at the gate. He was a lean, weathered man in his 40s, with a face that had clearly spent decades outdoors and hands that looked like they'd been carved out of old lumber. He looked at her for exactly 1 moment longer than was polite, then nodded and carried her bag. "Boss is in the barn," he said. "He knows you're coming." "Thank you," she said. The ranch house was plain and solid weathered wood, a long covered porch, 2 chimneys. The yard was in honest condition, the kind that comes from people working hard rather than caring about appearances. She appreciated that. Nathan came out of the barn when she was still 20 feet from it. She'd wondered in the 3 days between the dance, and now whether she'd imagined the quality of the conversation. Whether distance and daylight would reduce him to simply a stranger who'd made her a job offer out of desperation. He walked with a cane light and folding, but he moved without hesitation across his own yard. He stopped at the same moment she did, reading her footfall, she realized. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Mr. Walker," she said. "I'm here. I see that." Then catching himself, "I hear that." "Either works," she said. Something in his face relaxed. "Come on, I'll show you the house." Marcus gave her a look, brief assessing, not unfriendly, and went back to his work. Inside, Nathan moved through the house with the particular economy of a blind man who has memorized his world to the inch. He showed her the kitchen, the pantry, the small office room where the ledgers were kept, the layout of what needed doing. He explained things clearly, and without apology or over-explanation, the way a person explains things when they respect the intelligence of who they're talking to. She asked questions when she had them. The tour ended in the kitchen. He stood with his hand resting on the table. "There's one thing I need to say," he said, "about the town, about what people will say." "They'll say plenty," she said. "Yes. And I want you to know whatever they say, it doesn't come from this house. I won't add to it." She looked at him. "I know that." "How do you know?" "Because you apologized the other night for something that wasn't your fault," she said. "And when I told you not to, you listened. That tells me something." He was quiet. Then, "You notice a lot." "I've had to," she said. He nodded once. "Then we'll start in the morning," he said. "Get settled tonight. Marcus knows where everything is if you need anything." He walked out. Evelyn stood in the kitchen of a stranger's house at the far edge of a Wyoming town, looking at the ledger books stacked on the office shelf and the worn wooden floor and the window that faced east toward the creek. She thought of her brothers. She thought of the narrow room at the Whitmore house. She thought of her mother, who had told her once that a person's worth was not a fixed thing, that it grew in the direction you sent it. She went to the pantry and took stock of what was there. In the morning, there would be biscuits to make. She started. That first week the town talked. It was, as far as Caldwell Creek was concerned, a story that told itself. The blind rancher. The big woman from Kansas. The ranch north of town that should have been sold 2 years ago. People arranged these facts into the story they found most interesting, which was not a story about a woman who knew ranch accounts and a man who needed help keeping them. It was something else. Something that gave them permission to discuss both Nathan Walker and Evelyn Calloway, in tones that felt like concern and functioned like entertainment. Margaret Hale mentioned it at the dry goods counter at least 4 times in the first 5 days. Harlan Beck mentioned it once in the saloon in a way that made other men sit up and pay attention. Nathan heard about none of it directly. Evelyn heard about most of it in the looks at the feed store when she came in to order, in the way conversation paused when she entered a room, in the studied neutrality of people who were performing courtesy while their eyes did something else. She ordered what she needed. She did not linger. She went back to the ranch. On the 7th evening, she was working at the kitchen table over the ledgers when Nathan came in from the yard. She heard him pause at the door. "You're still up," he said. "The March accounts were short by $12, and I wanted to find it before I slept." She paused. "I found it." Pete was carrying the feed cost on the wrong line. He came in, sat across the table on the other side of the lamp she was using. "You found things in there I missed," he said. "I'm decent with numbers, but the layout's never been right. I set it up before." He stopped. "Before you lost your sight?" "Yeah." "I can reorganize it," she said. "Make it so someone can read it to you in a way that actually makes sense. Or you can feel the layout. I can create a raised edge system on the ledger pages. I've seen it done." He looked at her. Or rather, he turned toward her the way he did, not quite looking, but attending, which was better than looking in some ways. "You've seen that done." "My uncle was partially blind from a barn fire," she said. "He ran his own farm for 11 years after. He just needed the information arranged differently." A silence. "Miss Calloway," Nathan said. "Evelyn," she said. "We're going to spend a lot of hours over these books. Miss Calloway is going to get exhausting." A pause. "Evelyn, then." He said it carefully, as if testing the weight of it. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "All right." "Why are you actually here? Not the job. I understand the job. But why did you come over at the dance? And why did you take this position? And why are you sitting there at 9 at night finding my accounting errors?" She set down her pencil. "Because I'm good at it," she said. "The accounting, the ranch. I know how to do these things, and not enough people let me do them because they look at me and they see something else first. And you..." She paused. "You can't see what I look like. Which is not why I came over at the dance, but it might be part of why I'm not afraid to be good at my job here." He absorbed that. "And the dance," he said. "Why then?" "I told you. You were alone, and nobody was doing anything about it." "That's not quite a complete answer." She looked at him. "No," she said. "It's not." She picked up her pencil again. "I know what it's like," she said, "to stand in the middle of a room full of people and be completely invisible. I know what it costs to hold yourself together when you can feel everyone looking at you and nobody is seeing you." She paused. "I wasn't about to walk past that." The lamp burned between them. "Evelyn," he said. "Nathan." She replied, testing his name back. "I'm glad you didn't walk past." She went back to the ledger. Outside, the Wyoming night settled over the Walker Ranch, wide and dark and very quiet. The way it got out here far enough from town that you could hear the creek if the wind was right. There were 60 head of cattle in the pasture. A barn that needed its east wall looked at. 2 horses that Marcus had worked hard and would need a rest day tomorrow. A herd that had survived a drought summer and was heading into a new season. And inside, a lamp burning over an account book. 2 people sitting across a table, both of them carrying things that the town of Caldwell Creek had decided were deficiencies, both of them still standing. The ledgers were reorganized by the end of the 2nd week. Evelyn had stayed up past midnight 3 nights running to do it, not because Nathan had asked her to, but because once she'd seen the mess of it, the wrong columns and the doubled entries and the March feed cost sitting in the wrong line like a stone in a shoe, she couldn't leave it alone. She'd rebuilt the whole system from the first page of January, cross-referencing against the receipts Marcus had stuffed in a tin box under the office shelf. And when she was done, she set it on the table in front of Nathan and described the layout to him. the way her uncle's wife had once described layouts to her uncle. Left column, right column. The feel of the raised ink marks she'd pressed into the page margins with a dried quill to give him something to find by touch. He ran his fingers across the first page without saying anything for a long moment. "This is different," he said. "Better or worse?" "Better," he said. "This is a lot better." He paused. "How long did this take you?" "Long enough," she said. He set the ledger down. "Evelyn." "It needed doing," she said. "Don't make a thing of it." I made a thing of it anyway, in the only way he seemed capable of. Not with words, but by being at the kitchen table the next morning, before she was with coffee already made, and the morning's task list organized in the order she'd mentioned the previous evening. She hadn't asked him to do that. He'd done it because she'd done something for him, and he was a man who kept accounts, even the ones that weren't written down. She noticed. She didn't say anything either. That was how things worked between them those first weeks. A language of noticed things, and silent acknowledgments and small adjustments made without fanfare, because both of them had spent long enough around people who needed every consideration announced and applauded that they'd both arrived at the same conclusion. The best kind of kindness is the kind that doesn't require a witness, Marcus noticed. He didn't say much about it, but she caught him watching them one morning across the yard with an expression that managed to be both approving and deeply private. The expression of a man who's decided something is good and has no intention of jinxing it by talking about it out loud. The ranch had a rhythm, and she learned it fast. Morning started in the dark because cattle didn't wait for daylight, and neither did anything else. She was up before Nathan, which surprised her the first morning and stopped surprising her by the third, because he moved through the house in the dark, the same way he moved through it in the light, with the particular confidence of a man who has mapped his world so thoroughly that external light is beside the point. By the time she had the stove going and the coffee on, he was already in from the morning check of the barn, hanging his coat on its peg, his boots carrying the particular damp smell of pre-dawn Wyoming grass. Anything, she'd ask. "Maisie's off her feet again," he'd say, or "East fence needs a look," or "Marcus thinks the creek's running lower than last week." And she'd write it in the morning column of the notebook she'd taken to keeping, and they'd eat breakfast and divide up the day. It was the most functional arrangement she'd ever been part of. It was also, she was aware, the thing giving the town of Caldwell Creek its primary topic of conversation for the entire month of June. The first time she went to the feed store after the second week, Tom Briggs behind the counter gave her the order and the change, and then said in a tone of carefully constructed casualness, "How are things settling out at the Walker place?" "Fine," she said. "Nathan managing all right?" "Remarkably well," she said. "Is there anything else I need to sign for the order?" Tom's wife, who was stacking bags near the door, said, "It's just unusual is all. A single woman out there alone with her employer," Evelyn said, "who is also Marcus's employer, and who runs a working ranch." "Yes," she picked up the order. "Good afternoon." She heard them begin talking before she was through the door. She rode back to the ranch with the supplies, and the particular feeling she always carried out of town. Not quite anger, not quite hurt, something harder and more durable than either of those. The feeling of a person who has decided that the opinion of people who don't know her is a tax she will pay and not enjoy and refuse to let compound. She didn't tell Nathan about it. She told Marcus, because Marcus had ridden in for nails that same afternoon and had clearly heard his own version of what people were saying, and he was loading supplies in the wagon with a jaw set tight enough to crack wood. "They ought to mind themselves," he said. "They won't," she said. "So we work." He looked at her sidelong. "You're real calm about it." "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm busy. There's a difference." He laughed at that, a short, genuine laugh, the kind that surprised him. He finished loading the wagon and said without looking at her, "You're good for this place. I want you to know that. Not saying it to be kind. Saying it because it's true, and somebody ought to say it." She held that. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. "Don't mention it," he said, and meant it literally. 3 weeks in Harlan. Beck rode up to the ranch gate on a Tuesday afternoon. Evelyn was in the yard when she heard the horse. She watched Beck dismount a broad man in his 50s, the kind of man who had made money and wore it in the specific way that meant he expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him when he entered. He tied his horse to the post and looked at her with the particular look she'd learned to recognize, the look that wasn't quite dismissive and wasn't quite polite and lived in the gap between the two. "Miss Calloway, is it?" he said. "It is," she said. "Beck, Harlan Beck. I own the Valley Crest operation south of town." He said it the way people say things they expect to impress. "I'm here to see Walker." "I'll let him know," she said. "I'll wait here," Beck said, and settled himself against the fence in a way that communicated he intended to wait as long as necessary, and found the inconvenience entirely acceptable because his business was important enough to justify it. She went inside and found Nathan in the office running his fingers over the new ledger layout. "Harlan Beck is at the gate," she said. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did a slight stiffening, a gathering the way a person braces for something they've been expecting. "How many times has he been here?" he asked. "First time since I arrived," she said. "He comes about 3 times a year," Nathan said, "always to make the same offer." He stood. "I'll go. Do you want me to?" "Stay," he said, not sharply, more like a man who knows what's coming and doesn't want her caught in the middle of it. "Please." She stayed. But she stood near the office window which faced the yard, and she watched. Beck spoke for nearly 10 minutes. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the shape of the conversation in Beck's posture. Expansive, generous, leaning forward. The posture of a man laying out something he considers an irresistible offer. Nathan stood with his cane at his side hat on, listening without moving. When Beck finished, Nathan said something. Brief. Beck responded larger this time, more gestured. Nathan said something else. Beck's posture changed, still controlled, but the generous expansion went out of it. Then Beck said something, and Nathan turned slightly away, which was as clear a dismissal as she'd ever seen from a man who couldn't make eye contact to enforce it. Beck stood there for a moment. Then he looked directly at the window where she was standing. She didn't step back. Beck remounted and rode out. Nathan came inside. He set his hat on the peg, set his cane by the door, and said nothing for a moment. "Same offer?" she asked. "Bigger than last time." He sat down. "He's added a sweetener. Says he'll keep Marcus on if I sell." He thought that would work. "He thinks a lot of things will work," Nathan said. "He's not stupid. He just assumes a man in my position is closer to desperate than I am." "Are you?" she asked. He looked at her. His particular look turned slightly in her direction, attending. "What do you think?" She thought about the ledger, the cattle count, the creek water level, the roof on the east barn. She thought about March's accounts and the feed costs and the number she'd worked out 2 nights ago that she hadn't said anything about yet because she was still checking it. "No," she said. "You're not desperate. You're tight. There's a difference. You've been running the numbers. That's what you hired me for." He was quiet. Then, "Tell me." She sat down across from him and told him the full accounting, the real numbers, what the herd would bring at fall market if the summer held, what the roof repair would cost against what it would cost to lose a barn where the line was between managing and sinking. She was direct about it the way he'd been direct with her about the ranch's state when she'd asked him to be. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment. "It's tight," he said. "It's manageable," she said. "If the summer holds and the herd gains weight. And if it doesn't hold," she didn't soften it, "then it gets harder." He nodded. His jaw was working the way it did when he was thinking something through that he didn't particularly want to think through. "Beck knows the numbers better than most people think," he said. "He has friends at the bank." "Then he knows you're not desperate yet," she said. "He's making moves now because he wants to get ahead of the moment when you might actually consider it." Nathan looked at her. "You figured that out from a 10-minute window observation." "I figured that out from the ledger," she said. "The window just confirmed the timing." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You're going to be inconvenient, you know that." "I've been told," she said. Outside. Marcus was leading horses back to the barn, calling something to them in his low, steady voice that the horses clearly found persuasive. The ranch made its ordinary sounds around them, the wind in the eaves, the cattle in the far pasture, the creak of the porch boards settling in the afternoon heat. Nathan said quietly, My father used to say the land knows who means it. Means it? She asked. Whether you're in it for what it can give you or what you can build on it, he said. He said animals know and land knows and children know, and that's why it's always worth paying attention to how animals and land and children respond to a person. He paused. Beck's horses are always in poor condition. She looked at him. I know that because Marcus told me, he said. 3 years ago. I can't see it, but Marcus can. He turned his hat brim once in his hands that gesture. This land knows I mean it. That's not going to change because Harlan Beck keeps showing up with better offers. She looked at her hands on the table, at the ledger between them. I believe you, she said. Why? He asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. Because I've seen how you talk to the horses, she said. Marcus isn't the only one paying attention. The silence that followed was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, because everything that needed to be said has been said, and both people know it. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then Nathan said, What did Beck say to you when you were in the yard? He introduced himself. And she looked at him. He looked at me the way men like that look at women like me. Like I'm a puzzle he's already solved and found uninteresting. Nathan's jaw set. Did he say anything disrespectful? He didn't need to, she said. Men like Beck don't say things. They arrange their faces. It's more efficient. Evelyn. His voice had gone careful and serious. Nathan, she said, matching his tone. I have been managing men who arrange their faces since I was 15 years old. I promise you I am not damaged by Harlan Beck's opinion of me. She paused. What I am is tired of it. But that's a different thing. He sat with that. You shouldn't have to be tired of it, he said. No, she said. I shouldn't. She stood and picked up the ledger. I'm going to finish checking the May columns, she said. Do you want coffee? Please, he said. She made coffee. They worked through the evening. The thing that happened on the last Friday of June started small, the way the worst things always do. Evelyn had ridden into town for the week's supplies, a routine by now, the feed store, the dry goods, the post quick and purposeful in and out before the conversations could develop into something she'd have to manage. She was tying the wagon outside Miller's General Store when she heard her name. She turned. It was Caroline Thorne. 22, the prettiest girl in Caldwell Creek, by general consensus engaged to the son of the town's largest landowner, and possessed of a particular kind of confidence that came from having never been required to develop a personality to compensate for anything. Miss Calloway, Caroline said with the smile women use when they've already decided the conversation. I heard you're still out at the Walker Ranch. I am, Evelyn said. How is that working out? Caroline tilted her head. It must be such hard work. All that ranch management. It is, Evelyn said pleasantly. I enjoy it. I imagine it's nice for Mr. Walker, Caroline said, having someone to help him, given his situation. She lowered her voice with professional sympathy. It's so sad, really. A man like that stuck out there. He must be so lonely. Mr. Walker is one of the least lonely people I've met, Evelyn said. Caroline blinked. Well, I just meant it must be hard without... She gestured vaguely. His sight, Evelyn said. Yes. Caroline recovered. Without that. It's remarkable he's kept the ranch going, really. Most people thought he'd have to sell by now. Most people, Evelyn said, haven't looked at his accounts. Caroline smiled again, smaller this time. You've really settled in out there. I have. People talk about it, you know. Caroline said it with the tone of someone sharing useful information out of genuine concern, which was the most dangerous tone in the vocabulary of small-town social weaponry. They worry, a single woman out there alone. With my employer and his ranch hand, Evelyn said. Yes, you mentioned. I didn't say anything like that, Caroline said. You were about to, Evelyn said. Not unkindly, not aggressively, directly. I appreciate the concern. The ranch is in good order. Mr. Walker is managing well and I have work to do. Good afternoon, Miss Thorne. She went into the store. Her hands were entirely steady. This was the thing she'd learned. The shaking happened later, always in private, when there was no one to see it. To see it when the performance of calm could finally come down. She'd learned to let it be private. She'd learned that the shaking wasn't weakness. It was proof that things still landed, that she hadn't gone numb, that some part of her was still paying full price for every hit. And that was actually fine. That was proof she was still human. That was something she'd decided to accept a long time ago rather than fight. She got the supplies. She loaded the wagon. On the way back to the ranch, she stopped at the post office where there was a letter waiting for her. She didn't recognize the handwriting at first. Then she did. Her brother's. She put it in her coat pocket and drove back to the ranch and didn't read it until after supper, when Nathan had gone to check on Maisie and Marcus was in the bunkhouse. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp on low and opened it. It was short. Her brother Thomas had never been a writer. Evelyn Mother's brooch came up in the estate settlement. It was supposed to go to you, but we couldn't find an address. Are you settled somewhere? We heard you went west. Write back and let us know. Thomas. No question about whether she was well. No mention of the farm being sold. No acknowledgement of the conversation they'd had in the kitchen on a cold March morning when he'd told her the farm was going to the boys, and she'd understood quietly and finally that some doors don't reopen once they close. Just the brooch. A practical matter. A loose end in the estate. She folded the letter and held it. She heard Nathan come in from the barn, his cane on the porch board's boots at the door. He came into the kitchen and read her silence, the way he'd gotten good at reading things with precision. What happened? He said. Nothing, she said. Letter from my brother. He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything, which was one of the things about him he'd learned when speaking was useful, and when sitting was more useful, and he made the distinction more accurately than most people she'd known. After a moment, she said, he wants to know my address, for the estate settlement. From your father. Yes. It's been 8 months, Nathan said. Yes, she said. He was quiet. Then, did he ask how you were? She looked at the folded letter. No. Nathan didn't say anything to that either. He's not a bad person, she heard herself say. Thomas isn't bad. He's just practical. He does what makes sense, and he doesn't spend a lot of time on what doesn't. She paused. I don't think it occurred to him that I might have wanted to be asked. Did you tell him? No. She looked at the table. I never have been particularly good at telling people what I need. I'm better at just doing the work and hoping someone notices. That's not going to fix itself, Nathan said. She looked at him. I know that. I'm not saying it to be unkind, he said. I'm saying it because I spent 3 years after Sarah left doing the same thing. Doing the work. Waiting for something to change without saying what needed to change. He paused. It doesn't work. She hadn't heard him mention Sarah before. She'd known there had been someone Marcus had mentioned once briefly, that Nathan had been engaged, that the woman had left, that he didn't talk about it. She hadn't asked. She asked now. Sarah, she said. His jaw tightened. My former she and I were to be married. 6 years ago. He said it with the particular flatness of someone delivering information they've rehearsed. She left when it became clear I wasn't going to sell the ranch and move east. She said she didn't want to spend her life on a piece of land that was, her words, one bad season from failure. I'm sorry, Evelyn said. I'm not, he said. Then, that's not true. I was sorry for a long time. He set his cane against the table. But she was right that the ranch is always one bad season from something. She just drew the wrong conclusion from it. Which was? That it wasn't worth it, he said. I think things that are always one bad season from something are exactly the things worth fighting for. Because they're alive. They're real. He paused. Something that can't fail, can't be loved the same way. She looked at him across the lamp. Is that why you're still here? She asked. Really? Part of it, he said. The other part is, my father broke this ground, and I don't break promises to dead men. She absorbed that. Write back to your brother, Nathan said. Tell him the address, get the brooch. It's not really about the brooch, she said. I know it's not, he said. But get it anyway, it's yours. Don't let things that are yours go because claiming them is complicated. She looked at the letter. That's a very direct piece of advice, she said. You told me you appreciated directness, he said. She almost smiled. I'll write him, she said. Outside, the Wyoming night had settled fully and dark and wide and studded with the kind of stars that only exist at real distance from anything made by people. The cattle were quiet. The creek was running low, which Marcus worried about, which Evelyn had written in the morning column 3 days running. The east barn roof was holding. The herd was gaining weight slowly, slower than they'd like, but gaining. The ranch was managing. So were they. What neither of them said on that Friday night, with the lamp low between them, and the letter on the table, and Sarah's name still in the air, was the thing that had been building for 6 weeks, in the specific way things build, when two people are being deliberately careful and not particularly successful at it. The awareness that had been growing in the space between the ledger columns and the morning coffee and the divided days, and the silence that was comfortable in a way that comfortable silence usually isn't. Not quickly, not without history. Nathan felt it the same way he felt most things by listening. By the quality of the air when she was in the room versus when she wasn't. By the rhythm of her movements in the kitchen, by the particular way her voice changed when she was thinking something through, versus when she'd already thought it through, by the sound of her pen on the ledger pages in the evenings, and what that sound had begun to mean to him about the evening itself. Evelyn felt it the way she felt things by noticing, and then deciding whether to pay attention to what she'd noticed. She'd been deciding for 6 weeks. She hadn't decided yet. She put the letter in her coat pocket. I should check the morning list for tomorrow, she said. Marcus moved the creek check to early, Nathan said. He wants us both out there. He thinks there's a section of bank giving way. I'll be up, she said. She took the lamp to the hall. Evelyn, Nathan said behind her. She stopped. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I notice. She turned back slightly. What? She said. The work you do, he said. I notice it, all of it. The ledger, the morning column, the way you handled Maisie last week, all of it. A pause. I know I don't say it, but I wanted you to know that I notice. She stood with that. It was not a declaration. It was not even close to a declaration. It was simply a man telling a woman that she was seen, not despite what the world thought of her, not in spite of anything, but directly, plainly as a fact. It was she thought the most anyone had said to her in a very long time. Thank you, she said. That matters. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the ranch settle around her, its creaks and its quiet, its particular breathing in the night. She thought about the ledger and the creek bank and the morning column and Thomas's letter and the brooch that had belonged to her mother and was technically hers, and which she had never thought to fight for. She thought about a man who had built something from nothing and refused to let it go. She thought about what it meant to decide that something was worth fighting for. She hadn't decided yet. But she was getting close. Across town that same night, Harlan Beck sat at his desk and wrote a letter of his own to a man at the county bank, a man he'd been cultivating for 2 years, a man who had certain influence over certain lending decisions that Nathan Walker would be facing when the fall taxes came due. Beck was a patient man. He was also, in his own mind, a practical one, and practically speaking, a blind rancher with a bad summer ahead, and a woman with no local roots keeping his books, was exactly the kind of situation that, with the right pressure applied at the right moment, had a natural and inevitable conclusion. He sealed the letter. I was not cruel. He told himself this often. He was simply a man who understood that land went to the people best equipped to use it, and sentiment was a fine thing in its place, and its place was not a working cattle operation. He put the letter in the Morning Post stack. Outside, the same stars that were visible from the Walker Ranch were visible from Beck's office window. The same night lay over all of it, the ranch and the town and the creek running low, and the 60 head of cattle gaining weight, slowly in the summer dark. Nathan Walker didn't know about the letter. But he knew Beck well enough to know that a man who showed up with a bigger offer was not a man who accepted no and moved on. He lay in his own dark that night and listened to the ranch and thought about the fall taxes and the creek and the herd and the east barn roof. And underneath all of it, in the way that true things sit underneath everything else, he thought about a woman's voice across a lamplit table saying, "It's not really about the brooch," and meaning 10 other things at once, and what it felt like to be understood in that particular way, not because of what you could offer, or what you'd built, or what you were worth on paper, but because someone was paying attention. He hadn't let himself want that in a very long time. How as if he was honest with himself, beginning to want it again. He closed his eyes. The ranch settled around him. The summer was only half over. The letter from Thomas sat on the corner of Evelyn's desk for 4 days before she wrote back. She didn't avoid it. She just let it sit there the way you let a difficult thing sit when you know you're going to deal with it, and you want to come to it with the right mind, rather than the first available one. She wrote back on a Tuesday morning. 3 sentences, practical and clear: the address, the acknowledgement of the brooch, a line saying she was well and working. She did not ask Thomas how he was. She noticed that she didn't, and she didn't change it. Some things you leave out on purpose. She gave the letter to Marcus for the post and went back to the creek survey she'd been working on since the bank gave way on the north section. The creek was the thing that summer. It ran through the east corner of Nathan's property, fed 3 of the 5 pastures, and in a good year was reliable enough that Marcus called it the ranch's second backbone. This was not a good year. July had arrived dry and stayed that way, and what had been a worry in June became a genuine problem by the second week of the month, when Marcus walked the full length of the creek line and came back with a face that said everything before he opened his mouth. "How bad?" Nathan asked. "The North Fork's down to a trickle," Marcus said. "The south section's holding, but if we don't get rain in the next 3 weeks, it won't be." Nathan stood very still. "The herd." "We moved them to the south pasture. They'll strip it by August," Marcus said. "We keep them split. We're hauling water to the north group by hand." "Then we haul water," Nathan said. Marcus looked at Evelyn. She looked at the map she'd been drawing: the creek line, the pasture sections, the numbers she'd been running on water consumption against herd size, against labor hours. "There's a third option," she said. Both men looked at her. Or rather, Marcus looked at her, and Nathan turned toward her with that particular focused attention that had stopped feeling unusual to her somewhere around week 3. "The Miller property," she said. "The abandoned one on your western border. It has a spring-fed pond. I saw it when I rode the fence line last month." "Miller's place has been empty 4 years," Marcus said. "The pond hasn't been," she said. "It's spring-fed. It doesn't care whether anyone's living there." "Who owns it?" Nathan asked. "That's what I need to find out," she said. She rode into town that afternoon and spent an hour at the county recorder's office, which smelled like dust and old paper, and the particular mustiness of records that no one has needed in a long time. The clerk, a small man named Jeffries, who wore the same green visor every single day, regardless of weather, found the Miller property file in 12 minutes and told her what she needed to know. The property had passed to Miller's son in Denver when old Miller died. The son had made no move to sell or develop it. The taxes were current, paid each year by a Denver attorney, which meant the son had not entirely forgotten the place existed, but had not in 4 years done anything about it. She had Jeffries write down the attorney's name and Denver address and thanked him and rode back to the ranch. "Denver," Nathan said when she told him. "I can write today," she said. "Ask about a seasonal water use arrangement. We pay a fee, we use the pond through the dry season, we don't touch the land otherwise." "And if he says no?" "Then we haul water," she said. "But it costs us nothing to ask." He thought for a moment. "Write the letter." She wrote it that evening, precise and businesslike, explaining the situation, proposing terms, including a fair number for the seasonal fee. She did not make it sound desperate. She made it sound like what it was: a reasonable proposal between 2 parties who could both benefit from a simple arrangement. She sent it the next morning. Then she went back to hauling water and watching the sky and checking the South Fork twice daily for signs of further drop. The reply came 8 days later. Faster than she'd expected. She opened it at the kitchen table with Nathan sitting across from her waiting. The son, a Daniel Miller, based on the signature, had agreed to the arrangement at her proposed fee. With one condition: the agreement needed to be reviewed and renewed annually, and if he decided to sell the property, the water use arrangement would end with 30 days' notice. 30 days, Nathan said when she read that part. It's reasonable, she said. He's not selling tomorrow, and it gets us through this summer. He was quiet for a moment. Then, how did you know about the pond? I rode the fence line, she said. You asked me to check the western section in May. I asked Marcus to check it. Marcus had a sick horse that week, she said. I went. He sat with that. You didn't tell me. There was nothing to tell. The fence was in good repair. She paused. Until now. Hi made that sound again, the almost laugh she'd become fond of. You're going to solve every problem on this ranch by having already been 3 steps ahead, aren't you? I'll try, she said. What she didn't say, because she didn't yet have words for it, was that she'd started riding that fence line, not just because Marcus's horse was sick. She'd started riding it because she'd begun to think of the ranch as something that needed looking after, not just managed the way you look after something that matters to you. Checking its edges, paying attention to its weak places, not because someone told you to, but because you'd developed a stake in it that went beyond the wages. She knew what that meant. She was still deciding what to do about it. The second week of July brought a development none of them had planned for. It started with Marcus not showing up to breakfast. This had never happened. In the 2 months she'd been at the ranch, Marcus had been at the kitchen table before 6 every single morning, reliable as the stove itself. When he wasn't there by 6:30, Evelyn put his coffee on the stove to stay warm and didn't think much of it. When he wasn't there by 7, she went to the bunkhouse. She found him sitting on the edge of his cot with a letter in his hands, and an expression she'd never seen on his face hollowed out the expression of someone who has just been handed news that changes the shape of their world. Marcus, she said. He looked up. His eyes were red, which on Marcus was as shocking as a stranger weeping in the street. My wife's mother, he said. She passed 2 nights ago in Colorado. He looked at the letter. Ruth's been out there a month already. She needs me. Evelyn sat down on the chair across from him. How soon? She asked. As soon as I can go, he said. I hate to do it to Walker. I told him end of the month and I meant it, but... Go, Evelyn said. He looked at her. It's too much, just you and him with the drought situation in the creek. I'll manage, she said. Go be with your wife. The herd alone. Marcus. She looked at him steadily. I know how to move cattle. I've watched you for 2 months, and I grew up on a Kansas farm. Go. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his face shifted, relief and gratitude and guilt all mixed together. I'll stay through the week. Get you sorted on the morning rotation. 3 days, she said. Show me what I need to see in 3 days, and then go. He left on a Thursday with his hat in his hands and his bag on his horse, and an expression of a man who was doing the right thing and hating himself for it anyway, which was the expression of a decent person in an impossible situation. And Evelyn had seen enough of the other kind to appreciate the decency fully. Nathan stood at the gate when Marcus rode out. He didn't say anything for a long moment after the sound of hooves faded. Then, just us then. Just us, she said. He turned toward her. Evelyn, this is too much for one person. I'll go into town, find someone. You'll go into town and find someone who doesn't know your operation, who'll spend 2 weeks learning what I already know in the middle of a drought situation, at the cost of however many days of attention the herd isn't getting. She said it clearly, not harshly. Give me 2 weeks. If I can't manage, I'll tell you. He opened his mouth. Nathan, she said. I will tell you, honestly. If it becomes too much, I will say so. I am not going to quietly drown to spare your feelings. But right now, it's not too much, and I need you to trust my assessment of that. The muscle in his jaw worked. You'll tell me. I will tell you, she said. He nodded once. Then tell me what you need from me, he said. That was the thing about Nathan Walker, that she'd turned over in her mind more times than she'd admit, the way he pivoted from trying to fix something to asking how to help when the person in front of him was capable and said so. It wasn't effortless for him. She could see it cost him something because he was a man who'd spent his entire life being the one who managed things, and fixed things, and held things together. And the loss of his sight had stripped that identity down to its bones and forced him to rebuild it from a different angle. He'd built it back as a man who listened, who asked, who trusted carefully the people who'd earned it. She was aware in a way that made her chest tight, if she stayed with it too long, that she was one of those people now. They managed. It was the right word for it, not graceful, not without cost, but they managed. She rose before 5 and was in the barn by 5:15, working through the morning, feeding and water check, and the north pasture inspection, before Nathan was out, and then they split the day's work, the way they'd learned to split everything by what each of them could do best, not by what convention said each of them should do. He handled the horses which he'd memorized as thoroughly as the house which he could manage in the dark, and had been managing in the dark for 2 years. She handled the cattle movement, and the water hauling, and the afternoon accounting, and the constant grinding small repairs that a ranch accumulates like interest on a debt. How was stronger than she sometimes remembered, which felt like a strange thing to notice about a man she worked beside every day, but it was the truth. Not just physically, though. He was undeniably built for hard outdoor work, but in the particular kind of strength that is stubbornness, married to endurance. He worked until she made him stop. She stopped making him stop, and he worked until his hands bled, which she only discovered because she saw the blood on the pump handle one evening and asked about it, and he said it was nothing, and she said it was not nothing, and she cleaned and bandaged both hands at the kitchen table, while he sat with the careful stillness of a man submitting to care he doesn't quite know how to receive. "You need to tell me," she said the same words she'd said to him about the work. "When you're at the edge. I can't see it if you don't say it." He was quiet for a moment. Old habit. Whose habit? Man who couldn't afford to show weakness, he said, for a long time. She wrapped the bandage and tied it off. That man is going to damage his hands badly enough to be useless for a week if he keeps it up. I hear that. Do you? I hear you, Evelyn. She sat back. The kitchen was warm. The lamp was low. Outside, the cattle were settled for the night, and the South Fork Creek was holding, and the herd was slowly, expensively, with enormous effort, making it through a drought summer on a ranch that should have broken by any reasonable measure, but had not broken yet, because 2 people in it were refusing with a stubbornness that was almost beautiful to observe from the outside to let it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." It was what she always said to him. The fact that he was saying it back told her something. "Why did you really come to the dance?" she asked. "That night, in June." He was quiet. "Nathan, because I was tired," he said, "of staying in." He turned his bandaged hands over. "My mother used to say that the only thing worse than being lonely is being lonely and invisible. I didn't want to be invisible anymore." A pause. I knew how it would go. I knew people would leave a space around me. I went anyway. Why? Because I decided that other people's discomfort with my situation was their problem, he said. Not mine, and I wasn't going to let it keep me in this house for the rest of my life. She looked at him. "That's almost exactly what I told myself," she said, "when I walked across the square." He turned toward her. "Almost," he said. "Mine was more I'd had enough of watching and not acting," she said. "I've spent my whole life being the person things happen around not to, because people would rather pretend I'm not there than deal with whatever it is that makes them uncomfortable about me." She paused. "And I saw you standing there, and I thought that is a person who deserves someone to walk over. And I was there. So I walked." He was very still. "I'm glad you walked," he said. "I know," she said. "You said, I mean it more now than I did then." The quiet that followed was different from other quiets. It had something in it, a shape, a presence, the particular quality of a thing about to be named that hasn't been named yet. Then from outside came the sound of a horse fast coming up the road. Both of them came to full attention. Nathan was on his feet before she was. "That's a hard ride," he said. She went to the door. The rider was Pete Galloway, one of Beck's hands, a man she'd seen in town a few times and recognized by his oversized bay horse. He pulled up at the gate hard and called out, "Walker! Walker, you in there?" Nathan came out onto the porch. "Calloway, what is it?" Pete swung down. His hat was off. His face was urgent in a way that was hard to fake. "Fire," he said. "South line near the Miller border. Beck's hands spotted it an hour ago. Wind's pushing it east." East was toward the Walker Ranch. Evelyn felt the cold certainty of it drop through her like a stone in water. "How fast?" Nathan said. "Fast enough," Pete said. "Beck's sending men, but he says you should know. If the wind shifts." "Get the herd out of the south pasture," Nathan said. He turned toward Evelyn, and his voice had changed, the careful, measured tone gone something more direct and urgent underneath. "North pasture up from the creek. Can you do it?" "Yes," she said. "I'll take the horses out of the barn. All of them." He was already moving, already reaching for his cane and then putting it down, moving from memory through his own yard, the way he always did, when urgency stripped away the careful management of being blind in public. "Evelyn, the cattle first." She was already running. The south pasture was 40 head, and every one of them could smell something wrong in the air, because animals always know before people do. They were restless, moving in tight circles near the far fence, and she understood the challenge immediately. 40 nervous cattle moving in the dark. One person, no dog, a fence gate on the north side that she had to reach before she could give them anywhere to go. She moved fast around the perimeter. Opened the north gate first, then came back around from the south, moving in from behind them, using her voice and her size and her movement. The way Marcus had shown her, wide, steady, not fast enough to spook, not slow enough to give them time to make a bad decision. They didn't want to move. She pushed harder. The smell in the air was getting sharper. She could see the distant glow on the southern horizon, not close yet, not immediately close, but real, undeniable. The kind of thing that makes every animal alive go electric with the oldest fear they have. "Move," she said, not screaming, low and firm and constant, the tone that said, "This is not a request. Move, come on, let's go." They moved. It took 23 minutes to get 40 cattle through a gate in the dark with a fire on the horizon. She knew because she'd looked at the kitchen clock when she ran out, and she looked at it again when she came back in to pump water for her face and hands, and 23 minutes was what it said. Nathan was in the yard when she came back out. The horses were in the north corral, all 4 of them sorted and secured. He was standing at the corral fence with his hand on the top rail, listening south. "How far?" she asked. "Wine's dropping," he said. "Pete came back 10 minutes ago. Beck's men got the south line. It's holding." She stopped. The relief of it was physical. A loosening in her chest and her legs, and somewhere behind her eyes that she hadn't been aware were braced until the bracing stopped being necessary. "Good," she said. 40 head, he asked. 40 head, she said. "North pasture, gates secured." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That was well done." She said nothing. "Evelyn, that was well done." "The cattle helped," she said. "They wanted out of there. I just gave them the direction." He turned toward her. She was aware of how she looked disheveled and dusty, and breathing hard from 23 minutes of driving panicked cattle through a dark field. Not a version of herself that she had ever considered particularly impressive. But she was also aware that Nathan couldn't see any of that, and what he could hear was the steadiness in her voice, and the fact that 40 cattle were in the north pasture and the gate was secured. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine. Evelyn, sit down." She sat on the porch steps. He sat beside her. They were close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, not touching. Not quite, but close in the way that 2 people are close when they've just come through something together, and the immediate emergency is over, and the body needs a moment to remember that it can stop running. "The barn," she said. "Did everything get out?" "Everything," he said. "I've got them all." "Maisie." "Settled," he said. "She didn't love the corral, but she's in." A pause. "The Miller property," she said. "If the fire had come further east." "It didn't," he said. "But if it had, the spring-fed pond, we'd have had a water source for firefighting on the western border." He was quiet for a moment. You thought of that. I'm thinking of it now, she said. After the fact. Which is how I usually think of things. I see what we needed, and then I figure out how to make sure we have it. That's just called planning, he said. It's called being terrified after the fact, she said. He was quiet. Then without turning, without making it into something formal, he said, You're allowed to be scared, Evelyn. I know. You don't act like you know. I'm scared privately, she said. It's more efficient. He made a sound, not the almost laugh, something softer. You and I have the same bad habits. I've noticed, she said. Across the dark southern horizon, the faint glow had died. Beck's men had held the fire line. The wind had dropped. The crisis which had arrived and escalated and nearly reached them in the space of 40 minutes was over. The ranch was still standing. They sat on the porch steps in the dark, not quite touching both of them, still running hot with the aftermath of it, and Evelyn became aware in the particular slow way that real things arrive, not like a flash, but like a light being turned up very gradually, that she was not afraid of what she was feeling. That was the thing that surprised her. She'd expected to be afraid of it. She'd been afraid of things like it before, of caring too much about something that might not care back, of wanting something she'd been told wasn't available to someone like her, of reaching and having the reaching be the wrong move. She'd built a very effective architecture out of not reaching and managing what was available, and deciding that what was available was enough. Sitting on this porch in the dark, after driving 40 cattle through a field with a fire on the horizon, she found that the architecture had simply quietly, without announcement, stopped feeling necessary. Nathan, she said. Yeah, he said. She turned to look at him, his profile in the dark, the strong line of his jaw, the way he was listening to the night with his whole body, which was what he did, which was one of the things she'd come to, which was one of the things about him. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. I've been thinking, she said slowly, about what you said the other night, about not letting things that are yours go because claiming them is complicated. I remember, he said. I think I've been doing that, she said. Not just with the brooch. She stopped. Started again. With most things, probably. For most of my life. He turned toward her. I've been deciding, she said, for 2 months, about this place and about... She stopped again. She was not accustomed to saying things out loud before she knew exactly how they'd land. About whether I was allowed to care about things here the way I've started caring about them. And... His voice was very quiet. And I've decided I am, she said. Aloud. The porch was silent. Evelyn, he said. You don't have to, she started. Stop, he said. Let me. He turned to face her more fully. I've been deciding something too, for 2 months. And I made up my mind tonight when I heard you out in that pasture in the dark, and I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't help, and I stood there listening to you work and thought... He stopped. I thought that if that fire comes any further east, the person I'm most afraid for is not my horses. It's you. And that I would trade every head of cattle on this property to know you were... He stopped again. That's not a small thing. For me. That's not something I've thought about anyone in a long time. She looked at him. I can't promise you a simple life, he said. This ranch is always one bad season from something, and Beck is not going to stop, and I am blind and stubborn, and I don't always say things when I should say them. Nathan. I'm trying to be honest. You're reciting your deficiencies, she said. I know your deficiencies. I've been keeping your books for 2 months. Something in his face broke open, not dramatically, not into pieces, but in the way a fist unclenches after being held for a long time. Relief and warmth, and something that was plainly, undeniably, a man letting himself want something. Then you know what you're looking at, he said. I do, she said. He reached out carefully the way he did everything in the physical world, precisely, and without apology, and his hand found hers on the porch step. She let it. His hand was rough and warm and bandaged on 2 fingers, and absolutely certain, which was how he did most things once he'd decided to do them. They sat like that for a while. The fire was out. The cattle were in the north pasture. The horses were settled. The ranch was still there, still standing still, his still worth keeping in all the ways that a thing can be worth keeping. Inside the post stack on Beck's desk, a letter waited for the morning mail. At the county bank, a man with certain influence was about to have his certainty quietly rearranged by a conversation he hadn't expected to have. Neither of them knew about that yet. What they knew on that porch in the dark, with the smell of a stopped fire fading on the south wind, was simpler and more important than any of it. The ranch had survived another night. So had they. The morning after the fire, Evelyn woke before 4. She lay still for a moment, listening to the ranch breathe. The horses settled in the north corral, the cattle quieter now than they'd been last night, the particular silence of a place that had been frightened and had come through it. Then she got up dressed in the dark and went to the kitchen. She had the stove going and the coffee on before she let herself think about Nathan's hand on hers on the porch steps. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took the coffee to come to a boil. Then she poured 2 cups and went to work. There was a lot of work. The cattle needed moving back to the south pasture once she'd ridden the fence line and confirmed the fire hadn't jumped any of it. The horses needed to come out of the corral in the right order because Maisie was still upset and would start trouble with the gelding if they came out together. The morning water check on the South Fork Creek needed doing, and the north section fence that the bank gave way under last week needed another look before the weight of the herd stressed it again. She had the list in her head before she'd finished her first cup. Nathan came in at 5:15. He moved to the stove without hesitation, found his cup where she'd left it, and drank without speaking for a moment. She was already at the table with the morning notebook. "South pasture fence first," she said. "I want to write it before we move them back." "I'll take the horses out while you do," he said. "Maisie first alone, give her 10 minutes before the gelding." "That's what I was going to say." "I know," he said. "We think the same way about the horses." She looked up from the notebook. He was facing the window, facing east, toward where the light would be coming from the way he did in the mornings. She had learned to read that gesture. It wasn't about seeing the light. It was about orienting himself, starting the day in the right direction. "Nathan," she said. "Evelyn." He said the same tone. She almost smiled. "About last night." "What about it?" She paused. "I want to make sure we both said what we meant." He set his cup down, turned toward her fully. "I said what I meant," he said. "Every word of it. I don't say things I don't mean. You know that about me by now." "I do," she said. "I meant what I said too." "Then we're agreed," he said. "Again." "Again," she said. He picked his cup back up. She went back to the notebook. Outside the ranch was coming into its morning sounds, and neither of them felt the need to make anything larger than it was, because they were both people who had learned through entirely different paths and entirely different costs that the things worth keeping don't need to be announced. They just need to be tended. She rode the south fence line and found it intact. The fire had stopped a quarter-mile short of the Walker property border held by Beck's men on Beck's own land, which was one of the few times in recent memory that Harlan Beck had done something useful for the Walker ranch, even if it had been entirely self-interested. She was back by 7:30, and the cattle were in the south pasture by 8, and Maisie was in the paddock sulking at the world by 8:15, and the morning was by any measure functional. It was while she was washing up at the pump that she heard the wagon on the road. She turned. It was Tom Briggs from the feed store, which was unusual. Tom delivered to the big operations, but not typically to the Walker ranch. They came to him. He pulled up at the gate and called out, "Miss Calloway, is Walker about?" Nathan came out of the barn. "Briggs," he said. "What brings you out?" Tom climbed down from the wagon with the slightly too careful movements of a man who has practiced how to deliver news he doesn't enjoy delivering. "I was holding an envelope." "Got something for you at the store," he said. "Came through the bank. Figured I'd bring it out since I was heading this direction anyway." He paused. "Didn't want it sitting on the counter where anyone could see it." Nathan took the envelope, held it. "What is it?" "It's from the county bank," Tom said. "That's all I know, truly." He looked at Evelyn and then back at Nathan. "I'm sorry, Walker. I don't know what's in it." He climbed back on the wagon and left without the usual pleasantries, which told Evelyn everything she needed to know about how bad he thought it might be. Nathan handed her the envelope. "Read it." She opened it. It was a letter from the Caldwell County Bank, signed by the branch manager, a man named Gerald Holt. She read it twice before she trusted herself to say it out loud. "They're calling the operating loan," she said. 60 days. Nathan didn't move. "The full amount?" he asked. "The full balance," she said. "They're citing drought conditions and reduced herd value as material change in the loan security." She paused. "Nathan, the balance on this loan." "I know the balance," he said. She looked at him. His jaw was set. His hands were completely still. A man controlling himself with the precision of someone who has had a lot of practice at it. "This didn't come from nowhere," she said. "No," he said. "It didn't." "Beck has a contact at the bank," she said. "You told me. Gerald Holt and Harlan Beck have been hunting partners for 10 years, he said. "Holt reviewed this loan last spring and told me it was in good standing." His voice was flat and even, every word placed carefully. Something changed. And the only thing that changed is Beck made his visit and then sent a letter. She looked at the bank letter again. The language was formal and cold and constructed to sound like pure financial prudence. The language of institutions covering themselves, and underneath it was the shape of a man who had decided that patience had run its course and it was time to apply direct pressure. 60 days, she said. 60 days, he repeated. "How much can you raise from the fall cattle sale?" "Depends on market price and herd weight," he said. "Best case, 2/3 of the balance, maybe 70% if the weights are good." "Then we need 30% from somewhere else," she said. "Or we need to find a way to fight the call itself." He was quiet. "Nathan," she said, "look at me." She caught herself old habit wrong word. "Listen to me. This isn't over. This is Beck putting pressure on a timeline he controls. That means the timeline can be challenged." "On what grounds?" he said. "On the grounds that the loan was declared in good standing 4 months ago and nothing material has changed in the security, except a drought that every ranch in the county is experiencing equally." She set the letter down on the fence post. "If Holt called this loan because of drought conditions, he'd have to call half the loans in the county. He didn't. He called yours." She paused. "That's selective application of loan terms, and that has a name." Nathan turned toward her slowly. "You know banking law." "I know my uncle spent 3 years fighting a wrongful lien on his property," she said. "I watched my aunt study every document they sent, and then study the law, and then write letters that made 3 different attorneys uncomfortable." She paused. "I paid attention." He stood with that. "Do we have a case?" he said. "I don't know," she said. "But we have 60 days to find out, and I'm not spending them sitting here feeling beaten." I was quiet for a long moment. The morning had gotten warm around them, the July heat building early. The cattle were quiet in the south pasture. The horses were settled. Then Nathan said, "What do you need?" And there it was. The thing she'd noticed about him that first week, and that still surprised her every time it happened. The pivot from fighting to supporting the moment, a man decided that the person in front of him knew what they were doing and chose trust over control. "I need the original loan documents," she said. "Every page, every addendum. And I need the letters Holt sent you in the spring when the loan was reviewed." "Office shelf," he said. "Top box." She had everything on the kitchen table within 15 minutes. She read for 2 hours. Nathan sat across from her for most of it, not asking, not pushing, drinking coffee, and listening to the sound of her turning pages, which was what he could do, and so what he did. At 10:45 she said, "Here." He straightened. "The loan agreement has a material change clause," she said. "Standard language. But it also has a corresponding clause here, section 4, paragraph 3, that says the bank's determination of material change must be consistent with its application of the same standards to similarly situated borrowers." She looked up. "That means, if Holt's calling your loan for drought conditions, he has to show he's applying the same standard to other drought-affected ranches. And if he isn't, then it's not about the drought," Nathan said. "It's about something else." "Or someone else," she said. He sat back. Beck. I can't prove that, she said. Not yet. But I can write a letter to Holt that makes clear we know the clause exists and we expect consistent application. And that if we don't see evidence of that, we'll be consulting an attorney about selective enforcement. Do we have money for an attorney? We have money for one letter asking the right questions, she said. After that, we'll see what Holt does. Nathan's jaw worked. He might call it anyway. He might, she said. But he might also remember that selective enforcement of loan terms is the kind of thing that gets banks in front of state regulators. And men like Holt like their positions and their hunting trips and their comfortable arrangements, and none of that survives regulatory scrutiny. She watched him think. Write the letter, he said. She wrote it that afternoon, precise, formal, without a single word of anger or accusation, which was the hardest kind of letter to write, because the anger was entirely present and had to be converted word by word into the kind of cold legal clarity that was far more effective than any emotion. She cited the clause. She cited the spring review letter. She asked plainly and professionally for documentation showing that the drought conditions standard had been consistently applied to the bank's loan portfolio. She read it to Nathan when it was done. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "My uncle used to say the most dangerous sentence in any negotiation is a polite question that both parties know the answer to." That's exactly what this is, she said. Send it, he said. She sent it the next morning. Then she went back to hauling water and managing 60 cattle and keeping a ranch alive through a drought summer with a bank loan hanging over it like a second sky. And she did it with the same focused efficiency she brought to everything, because falling apart was not useful, and she had never been particularly good at things that weren't useful. But there were moments, usually late, usually after Nathan had gone to bed, and the ranch had settled into its night sounds, when she sat at the kitchen table and felt the weight of it fully, the way you can only feel things fully when no one is watching. The loan balance. The 60 days. The herd weights that were improving but not fast enough. The creek still running low. Marcus gone. Beck's patience, which was the patience of a man who had money and time and no personal stake in the suffering his patience caused. She let herself feel it. Then she put it away and went to bed. The reply from Gerald Holt arrived 11 days later. She was in the yard when the post came. She opened it standing there, which was something she never did. She always brought mail inside, always read it at the table, but she couldn't wait. She read it twice. Then she went inside and sat down and read it a third time. Nathan heard her come in and heard her sit down and heard the specific quality of her silence, which by now he could read as accurately as she could read his jaw and his hands. "Tell me," he said. "He's not withdrawing the call," she said. "But he's agreed to a 90-day extension on the timeline." She paused. "And he's attached documentation showing—" She stopped. Read again. "He's attached documentation showing 3 other ranches in the county received similar review notices this spring. But not call letters," Nathan said. "Not call letters," she confirmed. "Which means our situation is still singular. Which means it's still Beck. Which means it's still Beck." She set the letter down. "But 90 days instead of 60. "It's not a victory," he said. "No," she said. "It's time, which is what we needed." He thought for a moment. "The fall market is in September." 7 weeks, she said. "If the weights are good, they're better than last month," she said. "I've been tracking." He went quiet. She could see him doing the math the way she did the math, running it through in his head, checking it against what he knew, looking for the number that made the gap closable. "We need a good hand for the drive," he said. "I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone." "I've been thinking about that," she said. She'd been thinking about it for 2 weeks since Marcus left. She'd written 3 letters, one to a ranch hand she'd heard about from Tom Briggs, one to a man. Pete Galloway had mentioned one to Marcus himself, not to ask him to come back, but to ask if he knew anyone who could help for 6 weeks. Marcus wrote back in 4 days, which was faster than she expected. His wife's brother, a man named Caleb, had worked cattle drives in Montana for 6 years and was between positions. He could be in Caldwell Creek by the 1st of August. He would work for fair wages and no trouble. she told Nathan. You wrote Marcus, Nathan said. 3 days after he left, she said. I figured someone who knew the ranch and vouched for the man was better than a stranger off the street. He was quiet for a beat. You didn't tell me. I wanted to have something real to tell you before I said anything, she said. I don't like raising hopes on maybes. He shook his head slowly, not in frustration, in something closer to wonder and something closer to that other thing that neither of them had put exact words to yet, but that was as real as the drought and the loan and the 60 now 90 days bearing down on them. Evelyn, he said. He'll be here Thursday, she said. That gives us 3 weeks to prep the herd before the drive. Evelyn, he said again. She stopped. What? She said. Stop managing for 1 minute, he said. She looked at him. His voice wasn't impatient. It was asking something. All right, she said. I know what you're doing, he said. I know why you do it. And I know it works, and this ranch would probably have fallen apart 3 weeks ago without it. He paused. But I need you to know that I see the rest of it too. Not just the ledger and the cattle drive and the letters you write before I know there's a problem. I see. He stopped. I hear the lamp going late when you think I'm asleep. I hear the difference in your voice when the numbers aren't adding up and you haven't solved it yet, but you're not saying so. Another pause. You don't have to carry it alone. That's what I'm trying to say. She sat very still. I know how to ask for help, she said. Do you? A silence. I'm learning, she said. He reached across the table. His hand found hers, with the accuracy he'd developed for everything he cared about, without sight, without hesitation, with absolute certainty about where things were in his world. We get through the fall market, he said. We pay the bank. Then we deal with Beck properly. How do you deal with Beck properly? She asked. By still being here, he said. That's always how you deal with people who are waiting for you to be gone. You're still there. Eventually, they have to stop waiting. She looked at his hand on hers. And if the market prices are low, she said, because she was a person who looked at the worst case. She'd always been a person who looked at the worst case, not out of pessimism, but out of the conviction that a problem you've already faced in your head is a problem you can handle when it arrives. Then we figure out the next thing, he said. Same as we always do. She nodded. It was Caleb Marsh who arrived Thursday with a bedroll, a spare horse, and the particular lean competence of a man who had worked cattle his entire adult life and wasted very little energy on anything that wasn't directly relevant to the work. He shook Nathan's hand, shook Evelyn's hand, looked around the ranch with the evaluating eye of someone who knows what a working operation looks like, and is assessing whether this one qualifies, and apparently decided it did, because he put his bedroll in the bunkhouse and asked when they wanted to start. Tomorrow 5 o'clock, Evelyn said. I'll be up at 4:30, he said, and went to look at the cattle. Nathan, standing beside her, said quietly, Marcus has good taste. He does, she said. What happened 10 days later on a Thursday afternoon when Evelyn rode into town for the week's supplies was something she had not prepared for, which was unusual because she prepared for most things. She was outside the dry goods when she heard her name. She turned. It was Sarah. She didn't know it was Sarah for the first 3 seconds. She knew it was a woman she'd never seen before, tall, dark-haired, fashionably dressed in a way that was slightly out of place in Caldwell Creek. The dress and the posture of a woman who came from somewhere that had more money and more options than a Wyoming cattle town. Then the woman said, You're Evelyn Calloway. And something in her voice made Evelyn understand. I am, she said. I'm Sarah Arden, the woman said. She paused. Nathan and I were engaged. 6 years ago. Evelyn looked at her. Sarah Arden was exactly what the imagination fills in when a man says she left because she wanted something I couldn't give her. Composed, certain of herself, wearing her beauty with the ease of a woman who had never had to develop other compensations. She was not unkind. That was what Evelyn noticed first. She didn't have the face of an unkind person. What can I do for you, Miss Arden? Evelyn said. I'm in town visiting my cousin, Sarah said. I heard, she stopped, seemed to recalibrate. I heard Nathan is still on the ranch, and that someone is helping him manage it. I work for Mr. Walker, Evelyn said. Yes. Sarah looked at her. The look was not dismissive. It was, if anything, searching, the look of a woman trying to understand something that doesn't fit the shape she expected. How is he? Sarah said. And it was, Evelyn could hear it, a real question. Not performance. Not social navigation. A real question from a woman who had cared about a person and left anyway, and was still apparently carrying some version of that. He's well, Evelyn said. The ranch is still standing, Evelyn said. Sarah looked at her for a moment. People in town say... She stopped again. People in town say a lot of things, Evelyn said. They say you're the reason it's still standing, Sarah said. Evelyn looked at her steadily. Mr. Walker is the reason it's still standing. He's been holding that ranch together for 6 years on his own terms. I just keep the books. Sarah was quiet. Something shifted in her face, a small private thing, the expression of a person adjusting their understanding of themselves. He wouldn't leave, Sarah said. Not defending herself, just saying it. The way people say old truths when they've been sitting with them long enough. That ranch. He wouldn't leave it, and I couldn't stay. You don't have to explain that to me, Evelyn said. I know, Sarah said. I know I don't. She looked at the ground, then back up. Is he happy? The question landed differently than Evelyn expected. Not as a threat or a challenge, or even as the complicated thing it probably was. It landed as something simple. One person asking in genuine good faith whether someone they'd once loved was all right. Evelyn thought about a man on a porch in the dark, with his hand on hers. She thought about the almost laugh and the morning coffee, and the bandaged hands, and the way he turned toward her voice like she was a fixed point in his compass. Yes, she said. I think he is. Sarah nodded. Once. The nod of someone receiving news they needed and didn't know how to ask for. Good, she said. Tell him? She stopped. No, don't tell him anything. He doesn't need to know I was here. All right, Evelyn said. Sarah Arden walked back toward the other end of town and did not look back, and Evelyn stood outside the dry goods for a moment with the supplies in her hands and the particular complicated feeling of a person who has just had a conversation that confirmed something they already knew but hadn't said yet even to themselves. She drove back to the ranch. She didn't tell Nathan about Sarah. Not that day. 3 days later, on a Sunday evening, when they were both in the office after supper, she told him. She told him plainly, the same way she told him everything, the facts, what was said, what she'd observed in Sarah's face, what Sarah had asked, and what she'd answered. When she finished, Nathan was quiet for a long moment. You told her I was happy, he said. Yes, she said. Was that true? She looked at him. Is it? He turned toward her. The office lamp was between them, the same way it always was in the evenings, its light finding the planes of his face, the careful set of his jaw, the thing underneath the jaw that wasn't careful at all. Yes, he said. It's true. She let that sit. She's not coming back, he said. That's not why she was asking. I know, Evelyn said. She was asking because she needed to know the ending of a thing. People need that. And do you, he said. Need to know the ending of things. I need to know the state of things as they are, she said. I'm less concerned with endings. He almost smiled. You are the least ending-focused person I've ever met. Endings happen whether you focus on them or not, she said. I'd rather spend the time on what's currently alive. He sat with that. The loan, he said. The cattle drive is in 19 days, she said. Caleb thinks the weights are good, better than last month. Beck hasn't made another move, he said. He's waiting for the market, she said. If the prices are low, he'll be at the bank door before we are. And if the prices are fair, then we pay the balance and he loses his leverage and has to go back to patient waiting, she said. Which he can do, but it costs him. Nathan nodded. His hand rested on the desk between them close to hers, not quite touching the way things had been since the night on the porch. Present. Certain. Not making itself into more than the moment required. Evelyn, he said. Nathan, she said. Whatever happens at the market, he said. Whatever the price is, whatever Beck does or doesn't do after, I want you to know that what you've done here for this ranch for—" He stopped. Started again. "I don't have a word for what the right thing to say is. I've been trying to find it for a month." "Then don't find it," she said. "I know." "Do you—" She looked at him across the lamp. "I know," she said. Outside. Caleb Marsh was in the bunkhouse, and the cattle were in the south pasture, and the South Fork Creek was still low, but holding, and the fall market was 19 days away. And somewhere in town, Harlan Beck was doing the math on his own timeline. The ranch was still standing. So were the two people in it. And Beck, for all his patience and his bank contacts and his carefully constructed pressure, had made the mistake that men like him always make about people like Nathan Walker and Evelyn Calloway. He had assumed that the worst thing that could happen to them was the thing he was arranging. He hadn't understood that people who have already survived the worst thing don't frighten the same way as people who haven't. The cattle drive was in 19 days. The books were in order. And in the office of the Walker Ranch on a Sunday evening in late August, a lamp burned steady between two people who had both separately and together decided that what they were building was worth every hard thing that was coming for it. The cattle drive left at first light on a Thursday. Evelyn had been up since 3:30, not because there was anything left to prepare. She'd prepared everything that could be prepared twice over the previous 3 days, but because her body understood that something large was happening and refused to pretend otherwise. She lay in the dark for an hour, running the numbers one more time. 58 head of cattle going to market. Current market price estimates she'd pulled from the county agricultural report, cross-referenced against 2 letters she'd written to ranchers she'd never met in adjacent counties who had sold the previous fall and been willing to write back. Caleb's assessment of the herd weights, which he'd delivered with the unvarnished precision of a man who had no reason to make the numbers better than they were. The loan balance, the bank's 90-day window, the arithmetic of whether it closed. It closed. Barely. If the prices held. She got up at 3:30 and went to the kitchen and made coffee, and did not let herself think about what happened if the prices didn't hold. Nathan was already in the barn when she went out at 4. She could hear him talking to Maisie in the low, even voice he used for horses. Not quite words. Just tone, the sound of a person communicating steadiness to an animal that needed to feel it. Maisie was not going on the drive. She was staying home with the ranch, and she did not appear to have made peace with this information. Evelyn stood at the barn door for a moment and listened to him. She had a thought she did not examine too closely, which was that she could listen to him talk to horses for a very long time and not need anything else from the moment. She filed that away and went in. "Maisie's decided it's personal," she said. "Maisie thinks everything is personal," Nathan said. He turned toward her voice. "Coffee." "On the stove," she said. "Caleb's up." "I heard him. He talks to himself when he works. Did you know that?" "I did," she said. "He narrates the whole morning. It's actually helpful. I always know where he is." Nathan almost smiled. They stood in the barn in the 4 o'clock dark. Both of them carrying the same knowledge, the same numbers, the same stakes, the same understanding that today was the day the summer's entire argument would be made or lost. And neither of them said it out loud, because they had both developed the same habit of not saying things that didn't need saying. "Walk me through the order," Nathan said. She did. The trail order, the pace, Caleb's position at the flank, the noon water stop she'd identified from the county map, the timing of the arrival at the market yards. He listened without interrupting, asking 2 questions at the end, both of them precise, both of them about things she'd already accounted for. "You're not coming," he said when she'd finished. It was not a question. They'd settled this 4 days ago. "Someone has to stay with the property," she said. "And Maisie." "Maisie doesn't need—" "Maisie absolutely needs someone," she said. "And someone needs to be here if Beck decides to make a move while the ranch is short-handed." He didn't argue. He'd argued when she first raised it 4 days ago, and she'd laid out the logic with the patience of a woman who had already thought it through from every angle, and he'd listened and then said all right, and he wasn't a man who revisited decisions once they were made. 3 days, she said. "You'll be back Saturday evening." "Saturday evening," he confirmed. Caleb appeared at the barn door. "We're ready when you are, Walker." Nathan reached for his hat, settled it on his head, picked up his cane which he used on unfamiliar terrain and did not use at home. "Evelyn," he said. "Nathan," she said. He turned toward her with that precise orientation he'd developed the way he always found her in a room by the sound and the warmth of her, and whatever other sense it was that people develop when they've decided someone is important to them. "I'll be back Saturday," he said. "I know," she said. He walked out. She stood in the barn and listened to the sounds of the drive organizing itself. Cattle moving Caleb's low narration horses, finding their rhythm, and then the sounds fading down the north road growing smaller, then gone. The ranch was very quiet. Maisie pressed her nose against the stall door and made a sound of deep personal grievance. "I know," Evelyn told her. "Me too." She went inside and started the day. The first day alone was productive in the way that days are productive when you fill them deliberately, when you choose the next task and the one after it, with the specific intention of not leaving enough silence for the things underneath to come up. She fixed the east barn latch that had been giving for 2 weeks. She reorganized the tack room according to a system she'd been planning since July. She rode the full fence line of all 5 pastures, which took most of the afternoon, and found one section of north fence that needed wire, and made a note and kept moving. She was back in the kitchen by 6, the ledger open working. At 7 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. She went still. It was not a sound she associated with anything good at 7 in the evening, with Nathan away and the ranch understaffed. She closed the ledger and went to the door. Harlan Beck stood on the porch. Howe was alone, which was either a courtesy or a calculation, and she suspected it was a calculation. A man with Beck's instincts didn't make social calls. He made moves, and he dressed them as social calls when it suited him. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I heard Walker's at the Market Drive." "He is," she said. She didn't open the door wider than it was. "What can I do for you, Mr. Beck?" "I wanted to talk," he said. "Rancher to well, to the person who runs this operation more or less." She looked at him. "It's 7 in the evening," she said. "I know," he said. "I apologize for the hour. I thought—" He paused. She could see him reassessing, recalibrating the approach. "I have a proposal, a serious one. I thought it deserved a direct conversation." "Mr. Walker would be the person to have that conversation with," she said. "Walker won't hear me out," Beck said. "He's made that clear. I'm hoping you might be a more practical audience." She looked at him for a moment. The evening light was low. Beck's face was neutral patient, the face of a man who had made many offers in many doorways and was comfortable in the posture. She opened the door. "You have 10 minutes," she said. He came in. She did not invite him to sit. She stood in the kitchen with her arms at her sides and the ledger on the table behind her and waited. Beck looked around the kitchen. The reorganized shelves, the ledger, the morning notebook, the coffee cup she'd left on the counter, with the look of a man revising a picture he'd carried of this place. "The bank loan," he said. "You know what he's facing." "I know what the ranch is facing," she said. "Even if the market prices are good," Beck said, "he'll be right at the edge. One more bad year, one more drought, one cattle sickness, one fence line failure, and the math doesn't close." He said it without satisfaction, which she almost respected. He was stating it as fact, not gloating. "I'm not here to gloat, Miss Calloway. I'm here to offer something real." "Which is, I'll buy the ranch at full market value," he said. "Not the distressed price. Full value appraised fair. Walker pays the bank, has money left over, and can start over. Somewhere with less—" He paused. "Somewhere with fewer difficulties." She looked at him. "And what do you need from me?" she said. "I need you to help him see it," Beck said. "He won't hear it from me. He might hear it from you." There it was. The shape of it finally clear. Not a proposal to her, but a proposal through her, Beck using the access she had to Nathan's trust as a lever, which was so precisely the wrong use of that trust that she felt the cold anger of it land in her chest and stay there. "Mr. Beck," she said. "Think about it practically," he said. "You're a practical woman. You've seen these books. Mr. Beck, she said again. He stopped. This ranch is not for sale, she said. That is Nathan Walker's position, and it is also mine. And if you came here tonight because you thought that reaching him through me was a different road to the same destination, I need you to understand that there is no road through me to Nathan Walker that he hasn't already approved. Beck looked at her. For the first time since she'd met him, his composure shifted not much, but enough. A slight rearrangement around the eyes. The expression of a man encountering something he hadn't fully modeled. You're very loyal to an employer, he said. I'm loyal to a man who has earned it, she said. Which is a different thing. She walked to the door and opened it. Good evening, Mr. Beck. He stood for a moment. Then he picked up his hat and walked to the door and stopped just inside it. The market prices this year are soft, he said. It came out flatter than his other words. I got the wire this afternoon from the Cheyenne market. Beef's down 8 cents a hundredweight from last September. She felt the number land. She did not let it show. Good evening, Mr. Beck, she said. He left. She closed the door. She stood in the kitchen for 60 seconds, doing nothing, which was what she allowed herself. 60 seconds, to let the real feeling of something move through her before she converted it into action. 8 cents a hundredweight down. 58 head. She ran the math in her head before she decided to run it because her mind did that now automatically with numbers that mattered. It was not enough to close the gap. Not at the loan balance they were carrying. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened the ledger and started from the beginning. She worked until midnight. At midnight, she put the ledger down and looked at what she had. She had 3 options, none of them comfortable. The first was accepting the shortfall and going back to the bank with a partial payment and a repayment plan, which required Holt to agree to modified terms, which required Holt to be willing, which required Holt to be something other than what Harlan Beck had made him. The second was selling stock the horses. Not Maisie. The other 3. Good horses worth real money enough to close the gap. Nathan would hate it. She didn't care whether Nathan hated it. She cared whether it solved the problem. It solved the problem. The third option was one she'd been turning over for a week and hadn't said out loud yet, not even to herself cleanly, because it required something she didn't know Nathan would accept. She had money, not a large amount, but 8 months of wages at the Walker Ranch plus 8 months of wages before that at the Whitmore house. Minus her minimal expenses had produced a number that sat in the Caldwell Creek bank under her name, and which belonged entirely and solely to her. It was not enough to retire on. It was not enough to start a business. It was by a margin she'd calculated twice, and arrived at the same answer enough to close the gap between what the cattle sale would bring at this year's soft prices and what the bank loan required. She sat with the third option for a long time. Then she went to bed. She didn't sleep much. Nathan and Caleb came back on Saturday evening, which was when they'd said they'd come back, because Nathan Walker was a man who said what he meant and did what he said. She heard the horses on the road and went to the gate, and she watched him ride in and read his posture before he said a single word. His posture said he knew about the prices. He dismounted. Caleb took the horses without being asked the efficiency of a man who understands when 2 people need a moment. You know, Nathan said. Beck came Thursday, she said. He told me about the Cheyenne wire. Nathan's jaw worked. He came here. He made an offer, she said. I told him the ranch wasn't for sale. A pause. You told him. It wasn't for sale Thursday, she said. It's not for sale today. That position hasn't changed. He absorbed that. The numbers don't close, Evelyn. They might, she said. Come inside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same lamp, the ledger between them, and she walked him through what she'd worked out. The partial payment option, which she laid out honestly and without softening the risk of Holt's response. The horses, which she laid out the same way. He was very still when she mentioned the horses. The 3 geldings, she said. Not Maisie. Tom Briggs knows a buyer in Douglas who's been looking for working stock. Fair price. Those horses are worth real money, she said. And the ranch is worth more than the horses. He said nothing for a moment, then quietly, My father bought the gray from a man in Montana. He was 18 when he made that trip. She looked at him. I know, she said. And I'm not saying it doesn't cost something. I'm saying the ranch costs more. Howe was quiet. What's the third option? He said. She hadn't said there was a third option. Why do you think there's a third? She said. Because you're not done, he said. I know how you sound when you're done, and you're not done. She looked at him across the lamp. This man who read her by sound and temperature, and the particular rhythm of her breathing when she was holding something back, who had learned her. The way he'd learned his land, thoroughly patiently, by paying attention when everyone else was looking somewhere else. She told him. She told him the number in her account. She told him the math. She told him that it closed the gap with enough left over for the east barn roof and the winter feed supply, and that she was not making the offer out of pity or sentiment, but out of the same practical reasoning she brought to every other problem on this ranch, because it was the solution that kept the most important things intact. He didn't say anything for a long time. No, he said. Nathan, that's your money, he said. You earned that. That's not I won't take that from you. You wouldn't be taking it, she said. I'd be choosing to put it where I think it belongs. It belongs to you. I'm aware of whose it is, she said. That's what choosing means. I get to decide where it goes. He turned away. He did it with the particular body language of a man who needed a moment and didn't want her to see his face while he was having it. Which was almost funny, given that she'd spent months reading him by everything except his face, but she gave him the moment anyway. It's too much, he said. What you'd be, Evelyn, what you'd be doing, is investing in something I believe in, she said. The same thing you do every morning when you get up and work this land that everyone has told you to sell for 2 years. Silence. It's not the same, he said. It is exactly the same, she said. The only difference is, you're willing to bet on this ranch, and you're not willing to let me. He turned back. Why? He said. Why would you do that? This is... He stopped. If the ranch fails, I don't believe it will fail, she said. I've read every page of these books, and I've watched you work, and I've watched this land, and I do not believe it will fail. And if I'm wrong, I'll live with being wrong. That's what belief costs sometimes. She paused. But I'm not wrong. He sat very still. Evelyn, he said, if I take your money, we are not talking about taking, she said. We're talking about a loan. Properly documented fair interest repayment schedule. I have the terms written up. I did it Thursday night. A pause. Of course you did, he said. Do you want to hear them? Yes, he said. I want to hear them. She read him the terms. They were fair, genuinely fair, not generously skewed in his favor, because she'd known he wouldn't accept terms that were obviously charitable, and she wasn't interested in offering them. Fair terms. The kind between two people who respected each other. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment. One change, he said. Which, the interest rate, he said. 2 points higher. She looked at him. That's not... It's what I'd pay the bank, he said. I'm not taking a reduced rate because I'm not taking reduced terms from you, Evelyn. If you want this to be a real loan, it's a real loan. She looked at him. All right, she said. 2 points higher. And I want it in writing, he said. Witnessed. Tom Briggs or whoever you want. I already have it in writing, she said. Of course you do, he said again. She looked down at the table. Up again. Nathan, she said. Yeah, he said. There's something else I want to say. She paused. About the money. About why. He waited. I've spent my whole life, she said, being in places where I wasn't certain whether I was welcome. The Whitmore house, my father's farm. Every room in every town where people arranged themselves around me like I was a problem to navigate. She paused. This is the first place in my life where I have never not once felt that way. And part of that is the ranch, and part of that is the work, and part of it... She stopped. Started again. Part of it is you, and I'm not going to let that go over a bank loan that I can close with money that's been sitting in an account doing nothing, because the thing it can do here is real, and the thing it's doing in that account is nothing. The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan's hands were flat on the table. Both of them. Still. Evelyn Grace Calloway, he said. Nathan Andrew Walker, she said. He stood up. He came around the table with the certainty he moved with when he knew where he was going. Not searching. Not cautious. The movement of a man who has made a decision, and the decision is firm. He stopped in front of her. His hands found her face, both of them gentle and certain, the rough warmth of them against her cheeks, tilting her face up toward his. "I have been in love with you," he said, "since approximately the 3rd week of June, when you reorganized my ledger at midnight because you couldn't leave it wrong." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "That's very specific," she said. "I'm a specific man," he said. He kissed her. It was not a tentative kiss, because Nathan Walker did not do tentative things once he'd decided to do them. It was certain and warm, and tasted like coffee, and the end of a summer that had tried very hard to break something and had not managed it. When he pulled back, he kept his hands where they were. "I love you," he said. "I want that said out loud clearly, so there's no question about it." "There's no question about it," she said. "Is there something you want to say?" he said. And she could hear underneath the steadiness of his voice the thing underneath not doubt, but the particular vulnerability of a man who has said a true thing, and is waiting, and finds waiting hard. "I have loved you," she said, "since approximately the 4th week of June, when you told me I was allowed to be scared, and then didn't make a thing of it afterward." His hands were still on her face. "That's also very specific. I've been living with you for 3 months, she said. "I've had time to identify the moment." He pulled her close. She let him. Outside, Maisie had apparently decided that whatever was happening in the house was less offensive than her earlier grievances because she'd gone quiet. The South Fork Creek was low but holding. The cattle that had made it to market and back had done their work, and the numbers, the careful, brutal, honest numbers that Evelyn had run and rerun for weeks, would close. They would close because she was going to make them close the way she made everything close, through the combination of careful accounting and stubborn refusal to accept a math that didn't have to be true. 3 days later, she sent the payment to the bank. Full balance. Gerald Holt's office received a bank draft and a cover letter that cited precisely and without editorial the clause in Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the loan agreement, and noted that the Walker Ranch considered its obligations to the bank fully satisfied and expected the lien on the property to be released within the standard processing period. She did not send a copy to Harlan Beck. She didn't need to. Word traveled in Caldwell Creek, the way it always traveled, faster than horses, more thorough than a newspaper carried on the current of a town that had made itself the primary audience of Nathan Walker's situation for 2 years, and would now have to find something else to observe. Tom Briggs was the first one to say anything to her face. He was behind the feed counter when she came in the following Monday, and he looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not the studied neutrality, or the performed concern, or the careful management of opinions that passed for politeness in Caldwell Creek. He looked at her with straightforward respect. "Heard Walker squared with the bank," he said. "He did," she said. "Heard Beck went to see Holt about it," Tom said. "Holt told him the account was closed and the matter was settled." She said nothing. "Beck's not a man who takes that kind of thing easy," Tom said. "No," she said. "I expect he isn't." Tom looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "He tried to buy this valley out from under 4 ranchers in the last 10 years. You're the first outfit that held." He said it the way he'd said the thing about Marcus, like something that was true and deserved to be said, and he intended to say it once and mean it fully. "I want you to know that means something around here." She looked at him. "Thank you, Tom," she said. "Don't mention it," he said, and started pulling her order. What Beck did was predictable, which was the advantage of dealing with a predictable man. He sent a letter, formally addressed to Nathan Walker, professionally worded, informing him that Valley Crest Ranch was withdrawing from any further interest in acquiring the Walker property, and wished the Walker operation well going forward. Nathan had her read it to him. When she finished, he said, "He's preserving the relationship, leaving a door open." "Yes," she said. "Do you think he'll try again?" "In a few years," she said, "when he's recalibrated. And when he does, we'll still be here," she said. "Same as now." He nodded once. "Same as now," he said. There was one more thing. She hadn't expected it, and she hadn't planned for it, and it arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in an envelope with a Denver postmark. Daniel Miller. She opened it and read it twice, and then went to find Nathan, who was in the paddock with Maisie, who had apparently forgiven the world for the cattle drive, and was accepting attention with the regal tolerance of an animal who has decided that generosity is a virtue. Miller wrote, she said. He turned toward her. His attorneys have been handling his father's properties for 5 years, she said. He's been thinking about the Wyoming land. He's not in a position to come out and manage it. His life is in Denver. She paused. He wants to know if there's a party interested in purchasing the property. He says given the water use arrangement we worked out this summer, he thought we'd be the appropriate first contact. Silence. The spring-fed pond, Nathan said, and 400 acres of good grass on our western border, she said. If the creek runs low again next summer. What's he asking? She told him. He was quiet for a moment. We don't have that. Not now, she said. But I've been looking at what the herd can do over 2 years if we're not carrying bank debt. She paused. It's not impossible. He turned toward her with the full weight of his attention. You want to buy it, he said. I want to make it impossible for Beck to buy it out from under us, she said. And I want a reliable water source on the western border. And I want... She stopped. What? He said. I want to build something, she said. Here. That can't be moved and can't be bought and can't be waited out. She paused. I don't want to just hold this ranch. I want to grow it. He stood with that. Maisie pressed her nose against his shoulder, impatient, and he put a hand on her neck without looking away from where Evelyn's voice was. You know what my father said when he broke this ground, he said. You told me, she said. He said the land knows who means it. Yeah, Nathan said. You mean it. I do, she said. He turned back to Maisie for a moment. Then he said, write Miller back. Tell him we're interested. Ask if he'll hold 30 days while we work out financing. He'll hold, she said. He waited 4 years. 30 days is nothing. She wrote the letter that evening. Then she made supper, and Nathan came in from the barn, and they ate at the kitchen table, the way they'd eaten at the kitchen table every evening for 3 months without performance or ceremony. 2 people at the end of a working day who had figured out that this was the best version of an evening either of them had ever had. After supper, she said, I wrote Thomas back, about the brooch. He looked up from his coffee. I told him I was well, she said, and that I was staying in Wyoming, and that I would appreciate having the brooch since it was my mother's and it belongs with me. She paused. I told him where to send it. Good, Nathan said. I also told him I was building something, she said. I thought he should know. Nathan was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him you were building? She thought about the land, the ledger, the South Fork Creek, and the spring-fed pond, and 58 cattle, and a ranch that had no business still standing, and was standing anyway. She thought about a man at a harvest dance with his hat in his hands, and a woman who walked across a square because she had decided that watching was no longer enough. A life, she said. I told him I was building a life. Nathan set his coffee down. He reached across the table, and his hand found hers, with the accuracy of a man who knew exactly where everything important was. Yeah, he said. That's what we're doing. Outside, the Wyoming evening was coming down, wide and quiet, and full of stars that existed at a real distance from anything small or mean or temporary. The cattle were in the south pasture. Maisie was in the paddock. The ledger was balanced. The bank held no lien on this land. The Walker Ranch was not for sale. It had never been close to for sale, not really, not in any way that mattered, because you cannot buy out a person who has decided that what they have is worth everything it costs. And the 2 people sitting at that kitchen table in the lamplight, in the last warm evening of a summer that had tried its level best to break them, had both made that decision a long time ago. Separately first. Together now. And the land, all 400 acres of it, with another 400. Waiting on a letter from Denver. Denver knew exactly who meant it.